My name is Trina, and I am 34 years old. Today is supposed to be the happiest day of my life, my wedding day. But there is a knot in my stomach. I refuse to invite my golden child brother Kyle to my wedding, and my parents threatened to cut me off. They even tried to crash the ceremony, but what happened next changed everything. Before I dive into my story, where are you watching this from? Hit that like and subscribe button to join me on this emotional journey of standing up for myself against my toxic family. Trust me, you won't believe how it all ends. I grew up in a seemingly perfect suburban neighborhood in Pennsylvania. Our house was the envy of the block with its manicured lawn and pristine white fence. From the outside, we looked like the ideal American family, but appearances can be deceiving. My parents, Margaret and Richard, owned a successful real estate business that afforded us a comfortable lifestyle. Mom was the driving force behind the business and family decisions, while Dad usually went along with whatever she wanted. Our family dynamic was relatively normal until I turned 7 when my brother Kyle was born. The change was almost immediate. It was as if a switch had been flipped and suddenly there was a new center to our family universe. Kyle became the golden child, the sun around which our family orbited, and I was pushed to the periphery. As Kyle grew up, the preferential treatment became more obvious. For Christmas one year, I asked for a bicycle for months, saving up half the money myself. My parents said it was too expensive, yet that same year they surprised Kyle with a brand new gaming system that cost 3 times as much, just because he mentioned liking video games once. When I made the honor roll for the 3rd year in a row, my parents nodded absently, then immediately shifted the conversation to how Kyle was doing in his kindergarten class. But when Kyle brought home a participation certificate from his soccer tournament, my parents framed it and threw a special dinner celebration. Family vacations were always centered around Kyle's interests. If he wanted to go to Disney World, we went to Disney World, even though I had been begging to visit New York to see the museums for years. When I finally got the courage to complain about it, my mother said, "Kyle is younger, so we have to make sure he has fun. You are more mature and can handle disappointment." My 16th birthday was perhaps one of the most painful memories. I had reminded my parents for weeks, even leaving notes on the refrigerator. The day came, and they forgot completely. They had scheduled Kyle's basketball practice and took him out for ice cream afterward. I spent the evening alone ordering pizza for myself using my babysitting money. 3 months later, Kyle's birthday warranted a backyard carnival complete with rented games and 20 of his closest friends. Despite the neglect, or perhaps because of it, I developed a strong sense of independence and resilience. I learned to rely on myself to celebrate my own achievements and to find joy in my own accomplishments. I excelled academically, particularly in math and art, and dreamed of becoming an architect. The one person who saw me was my grandmother Dorothy. She lived about an hour away and would often invite me for weekend visits. In her cozy house filled with the smell of freshly baked cookies, I found the validation I craved. "You have a special light in you, Trina," she would tell me while we worked on puzzles together. "Never let anyone dim that light." Grandma Dorothy noticed the unfair treatment, and occasionally she would try to speak to my parents about it. "Margaret, you missed Trina's art show. She won first place," she would say. My mother would dismiss her concerns. "Mom, Trina understands we were busy with Kyle's doctor appointment. It was just a school art show, there will be others." By the time I was preparing to graduate high school, I had accepted my position in the family hierarchy. I had built emotional walls to protect myself from the constant disappointment and had my sights set on escape. College would be my ticket to freedom, a chance to build a life where I would be valued and seen. The day I left for State University was the first time I felt truly free. With partial scholarship papers in my hand and 2 suitcases packed with everything I owned, I was ready to start a new chapter. My parents drove me to campus, but their minds were clearly elsewhere. My mother checked her phone repeatedly, worried about leaving Kyle at home with a babysitter for the day. "We can't stay for the campus tour," my father explained as they helped unload my belongings in front of my dormitory. "Kyle has a soccer game this afternoon and we promised we'd be back." I nodded, having expected nothing more. "That's fine, I can manage." My mother handed me an envelope with $500. "This should help with books and supplies," she said. "We'd give more, but Kyle's private coaching sessions are quite expensive." I accepted the envelope knowing that $500 would barely cover a fraction of my textbooks. Meanwhile, my parents had already promised Kyle a fully funded education at an Ivy League school, complete with an apartment and a monthly allowance when his time came. After a quick, awkward hug, they were gone. I stood alone amid boxes and suitcases, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. The sadness didn't last long. "You must be Trina," a cheerful voice called out. My roommate Jessica bounced into the room, her curly red hair tied in a messy bun. "Need help with those boxes? My brother and his friends are helping me move in, and they have muscles to spare." Jessica became my first real friend at college. She was studying psychology and had an uncanny ability to read people. After just a few weeks of living together, she commented on my phone calls with my family. "You get really quiet when you talk to your parents," she observed one evening after I hung up. "And they seem to talk about your brother a lot." I shrugged it off initially, but Jessica's observation opened the door to conversations about family dynamics. Through her, I met other students who became my chosen family. Marco, an international student with a passion for literature, Aiden, a computer science genius with a wicked sense of humor, and Taylor, a future social worker with infinite compassion. Together, we formed a tight-knit group that supported each other through exam stress, relationship dramas, and family issues. For the first time, I felt what it was like to be valued and prioritized by others. College life wasn't easy financially. While other students enjoyed weekend trips and spring break vacations, I juggled classes with a part-time job at the campus bookstore and weekend shifts at a local cafe. Every penny I earned went toward tuition, books, and living expenses. My academic life flourished despite the financial strain. I discovered my passion for architectural design in my sophomore year and declared it as my major. Professor Wilson, my design instructor, recognized my talent and took me under his wing. "You have a unique perspective, Trina," he told me after reviewing my midterm project. "Your designs are both functional and emotionally resonant. That's rare." Professor Wilson became a mentor, encouraging me to apply for internships and introducing me to industry contacts. His belief in me helped counterbalance the years of being overlooked at home. Meanwhile, Kyle's golden child status continued unabated. My parents bought him a brand new car for his high school graduation, citing his need for transportation to sports activities. When I called home, the conversations invariably centered around Kyle's achievements, no matter what news I tried to share. "I made the dean's list again," I mentioned during one call. "That's nice, honey," my mother replied distractedly. "Did I tell you Kyle got scouted by the state university's baseball team? They're very interested in him." Every week, Kyle received care packages filled with homemade cookies, snacks, gift cards, and notes of encouragement. I received a generic birthday card with a $20 bill twice a year for my birthday and Christmas. The disparity became undeniably clear during Thanksgiving break of my junior year. I had saved enough to fly home for the holiday, eager to share my recent internship offer with a respected architectural firm. At the dinner table, surrounded by extended family, I waited for an appropriate moment to share my news. "We have an announcement," my father said, raising his glass. "Kyle has been accepted to Westridge University with a partial sports scholarship." Cheers erupted around the table. Westridge was a decent school, though nowhere near the caliber of institutions Kyle could have aimed for with his grades and my parents' financial support. "Congratulations, Kyle," I said sincerely. "And," my mother added, beaming, "we've decided to buy a condo near the campus, so Kyle doesn't have to deal with cramped dorm life." I nearly choked on my water. A condo. But when I asked for help with my security deposit for an off-campus apartment last year, "That was different, Trina," my father said dismissively. "You had your scholarship, and we needed to save for Kyle's education." The conversation moved on, and I never got to share my internship news. That night, as I laid in my childhood bedroom, I made a decision. After graduation, I would limit my contact with my parents to the bare minimum. I deserved better than being a footnote in the Kyle story. After graduation, I accepted a position at a prestigious architectural firm in Chicago. The city was a 6-hour drive from my hometown, a distance that felt both liberating and protective. I found a small but charming apartment in a vibrant neighborhood and threw myself into building my career. The first year was challenging, but exhilarating. Long hours at the office were rewarded with increasing responsibilities and recognition from senior partners. My designs began to get noticed, and by my second year, I was assigned to work on a significant commercial project. My contact with my parents dwindled to obligatory holiday calls and rare visits. When we did speak, the pattern remained the same: brief inquiries about my life, followed by extensive updates on Kyle's activities. Kyle, despite the advantages he'd been given, struggled to find his footing after college. He graduated with a mediocre GPA and no clear career path. Rather than encouraging independence, my parents continued their pattern of coddling him. "Kyle's taking some time to find himself," my mother explained during one of our rare phone conversations. "He's moved back home while he figures out his next steps." Those next steps turned into a series of false starts. Kyle decided to open a sports equipment store, and my parents funded the venture without hesitation. 6 months later, the business failed due to Kyle's lack of business acumen and commitment. Next came a food truck idea, then a plan to become a personal trainer. Each new scheme received enthusiastic financial backing from my parents, and each ended in failure. Through mutual family friends, I heard that my parents had remortgaged their house to cover Kyle's business debts. Yet whenever I offered suggestions or expressed concern, I was shut down immediately. "You don't understand Kyle's potential," my father said defensively. "He just hasn't found the right opportunity yet." While Kyle floundered with my parents' endless support, I was building a stable and fulfilling life on my own. My career was flourishing. I had formed meaningful friendships in Chicago, and I had even started volunteering at a community center teaching art and design to underprivileged teens. It was at a charity fundraiser for the community center that I met James. He was tall, with kind eyes and a quiet confidence that immediately drew me in. As a pediatric surgeon, he had been invited to speak about the importance of creative outlets for children's development. "Architecture and medicine aren't so different," he said when we were introduced. "We're both in the business of creating spaces where people can thrive." Our connection was immediate and profound. Over dinner the following weekend, we discovered shared values and complementary temperaments. James was thoughtful and analytical, balancing my more intuitive approach to life. He made me laugh with his dry humor and listened attentively when I shared stories about my work and passions. As our relationship deepened, James noticed my reluctance to discuss my family. "You light up when you talk about your grandmother or your college friends," he observed one evening, "but you get this guarded look whenever your parents or brother come up." Slowly, I opened up about my family dynamics. Instead of dismissing my experiences or suggesting I was overreacting, James validated my feelings. "That's not normal or healthy, Trina," he said firmly. "Favoring one child so blatantly damages both children. Kyle wasn't done any favors either, even if he got all the material benefits." After 6 months of dating, I finally agreed to introduce James to my family during a weekend visit home. I had warned him about the dynamics, but experiencing it firsthand was still jarring for him. The dinner was a disaster from the start. My mother barely acknowledged James's career as a pediatric surgeon despite its prestige. My father repeatedly interrupted James to share another anecdote about Kyle's latest venture, a podcast about sports that had exactly 12 subscribers. Kyle himself was late to dinner, arriving unapologetically 30 minutes after our reservation time. Throughout the meal, he made inappropriate comments about my appearance, "Finally putting some effort into how you look, huh, sis?" and condescending remarks about my career. "Drawing buildings for a living must be so simple." The breaking point came when Kyle accidentally spilled red wine on James's suit after James had politely challenged one of Kyle's more outlandish claims about professional athletes. My parents immediately fussed over Kyle as if he were the victim in the situation. On the drive back to our hotel, James was uncharacteristically quiet. Finally, he spoke. "I've worked with dysfunctional families in my practice, but seeing it up close like this..." He shook his head. "Trina, what they're doing isn't love. Not for you, and honestly not for Kyle either." That night, James helped me see the toxic patterns I had normalized for years. He didn't pressure me to cut ties with my family, but encouraged me to establish healthier boundaries. With his support, I began to understand that limiting my exposure to my family's dysfunction wasn't selfish, it was necessary for my well-being. James proposed on a crisp autumn morning during a weekend trip to Lake Michigan. We had woken up early to watch the sunrise from a small secluded beach. As the sky transformed from deep purple to brilliant orange, James got down on one knee, presenting a vintage-style emerald ring that he knew I would prefer over a traditional diamond. "Trina, you've taught me what resilience and genuine kindness look like," he said, his voice slightly shaky. "I want to build a life with you, create our own family based on mutual respect and unconditional love. Will you marry me?" Tears streaming down my face, I said yes without hesitation. That moment of pure joy stayed with me throughout the morning as we celebrated with champagne brunch and calls to our closest friends. It wasn't until later that afternoon that the anxiety began to creep in as I contemplated sharing the news with my parents. "They might not come," I warned James as I dialed their number. "Or worse, they'll make it all about Kyle somehow." My prediction wasn't far off. When I announced our engagement, my mother's first response was, "Oh, that's nice, honey. Have you thought about what role Kyle will play in the wedding? He'd make a wonderful best man for James." I gritted my teeth. "Mom, James has his own brother and best friend for those roles. We're thinking of having a small wedding anyway." "Small?" My mother sounded horrified. "But Kyle has so many friends who would expect to be invited." The conversation set the tone for what would become months of wedding planning battles. James and I had decided on an intimate ceremony at a beautiful historic venue in Chicago, with only our closest friends and family, about 60 guests total. We wanted the day to be meaningful rather than extravagant. My parents, however, had different ideas. They began sending me lists of people I had to invite, most of whom were Kyle's friends or my parents' business associates I barely knew. When I gently but firmly explained our vision for the day, they accused me of being selfish. "A wedding isn't just about the bride," my father lectured me over the phone. "It's about family." The irony of his statement wasn't lost on me after years of being treated as an afterthought in the family. Still, I tried to compromise, agreeing to add a few of their close friends to the guest list. But the situation escalated dramatically. When I made a decision that deep down I knew was necessary, I decided not to invite Kyle to the wedding. The decision wasn't made lightly. Over the years, Kyle had ruined numerous important events in my life with his self-centered behavior. At my college graduation party, he had gotten drunk and made a scene demanding attention. During my 30th birthday dinner, he had shown up 2 hours late, complained about the restaurant choice, and then left early when the conversation wasn't focused on him. But what cemented my decision was an incident just 2 months before the engagement. James and I had hosted a small dinner party to celebrate my promotion at work. Kyle had attended and spent the evening making demeaning comments about my career, suggesting I only got promoted because they needed more women architects to look good, and attempting to flirt with one of my married colleagues. When confronted about his behavior, he dismissed it as just joking around. I knew in my heart that having Kyle at my wedding would mean spending the day anxious about what he might say or do. This was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life, and I deserved to experience it without that stress. Telling my parents about my decision was one of the hardest conversations of my life. I invited them to lunch without Kyle and explained my reasoning as gently but honestly as possible. "I love Kyle because he's my brother," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But his behavior at important events has been consistently disruptive. James and I want a peaceful, joyful wedding day." My mother's face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. Kyle is your brother. How dare you exclude him from your wedding?" "Trina, you can't be serious," my father added, his voice cold. "What will people say when they realize your only brother isn't at your wedding? They'll probably assume he's doing what he usually does, making the day about himself in some way." I replied, my patience wearing thin after years of being the understanding one. My mother slammed her hand on the table. "If Kyle isn't invited, we won't be coming either, and you can forget about any financial contribution from us." I took a deep breath. "Mom, Dad, I didn't ask for your financial support. James and I are paying for the wedding ourselves. We want you there, but I understand if you choose not to come." "You ungrateful child," my mother hissed. "After everything we've done for you." I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped. And what exactly would that be? The college education I paid for myself, the apartment deposits you refused to help with, the birthdays you forgot. My father stood up, his face red with anger. That's enough. If you go through with this, you're no longer part of this family. No daughter of mine would be so cruel to her brother. I left the restaurant in tears, but with a strange sense of clarity. The ultimatum had been delivered not by me, but by them. And their threat to cut me off from a family that had never truly valued me didn't hold the power they thought it did. James was waiting at home, concerned about how the conversation had gone. When I told him what happened, he held me while I cried, then looked me in the eyes. Trina, we can change our plans if you want to, but I want you to know that I'm behind you 100% whatever you decide. And remember, family isn't just about blood. It's about who treats you with love and respect. His words strengthened my resolve. We would have our wedding day on our terms, surrounded by people who genuinely cared for us both. The weeks following my confrontation with my parents were emotionally turbulent. I vacillated between certainty that I had made the right decision and crushing guilt that I was somehow being the unreasonable one. James suggested I speak with a therapist to help process these feelings, and those sessions became a lifeline during the wedding preparations. Dr. Lena Harper, my therapist, helped me understand that my feelings of guilt were a programmed response after years of being conditioned to put my family's demands above my own well-being. You've been trained to feel responsible for their happiness, she explained, but you're not responsible for managing their emotions or reactions. Meanwhile, our friends rallied around us in ways that touched me deeply. Jessica, my college roommate and now maid of honor, organized a surprise bridal shower where each guest brought a small token representing a wish for our marriage. My colleagues at the architectural firm gifted us with a custom-designed guest book. James's family, particularly his mother Sandra, welcomed me warmly and helped with wedding preparations without any of the drama I had grown accustomed to from my own parents. Just as we were finding our footing again, the situation took an alarming turn. I began receiving anonymous text messages suggesting that my wedding day would be unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. At first, I tried to dismiss them as spam, but the messages became increasingly specific, mentioning details about our venue that weren't public information. Then vendors began calling to confirm changes to arrangements we hadn't made. Our florist contacted me, confused about an email she had received requesting a complete change in the floral arrangements. The caterer called about a cancellation request. The wedding venue manager reported that someone claiming to be me had called asking about their cancellation policy. We realized someone was actively trying to sabotage our wedding. Though the messages and fake cancellations weren't directly traceable to my family, the timing was too coincidental to ignore. James and I were forced to take protective measures. We changed the passwords on all our wedding planning accounts and added security questions that only we would know the answers to. We alerted all vendors about the potential for fraudulent communications and requested that they verify any changes directly with both of us via video call. We even considered changing the venue but were reluctant to lose our deposit and the perfect space we had found. The stress began taking a physical toll. I developed insomnia, lying awake at night imagining worst-case scenarios for our wedding day. I had nightmares about my parents and Kyle bursting into the ceremony, creating a scene that would ruin the day. James noticed my exhaustion and suggested we consider postponing. Our marriage is what matters, not the wedding day, he assured me. We can wait until this family storm blows over. But something in me refused to yield. No, I said firmly. If we postpone, they win. They'll learn that they can control our lives through manipulation and threats. We're getting married on May 15th as planned. James squeezed my hand. Then we'll make sure it's the wonderful day you deserve. Let's hire security for the venue. That's exactly what we did. We contracted a professional security team, briefing them on the situation and providing photos of my parents and Kyle. We created a strict guest list policy requiring identification at the entrance. We informed our wedding party about the potential for disruption, though we kept the details vague to avoid casting a shadow over the celebration for everyone else. As the wedding week approached, I received an unexpected call from my grandmother Dorothy. Though she had kept in touch over the years, our contact had been limited due to my mother's interference. Her call came as a surprise. Trina, sweetheart? Her voice was urgent. I need to warn you. Your parents and Kyle are planning to come to your wedding uninvited. They've been talking about showing you the error of your ways and making some kind of statement at the ceremony. My heart sank. How do you know this, Grandma? Your mother called me trying to recruit me into their plan. She thought I would agree with them. Her voice hardened. I told her she was making a terrible mistake, but she wouldn't listen. So I'm warning you instead. I thanked her for the information, my mind already racing through additional security measures we might need. There's something else you should know. Grandma Dorothy added, her voice softer now. I've been watching how they've treated you all these years, and it's not right. I've also been watching the family finances as a trustee of your grandfather's estate. She paused, and I could hear her take a deep breath. Trina, there's a family trust that was set up for both you and Kyle equally. Your parents have been accessing those funds, but only using them for Kyle. I've been gathering documentation, and I've spoken with the family lawyer. We'll be at your wedding, and we're bringing some information that might change everything. After hanging up, I immediately called James and our security team to update them on the potential gate crashers. Despite the warning, a part of me didn't truly believe my parents would go through with something so disruptive. Surely they wouldn't actually crash my wedding. But another part of me, the part that had endured years of their preferential treatment of Kyle, knew better than to underestimate their devotion to their golden child. The day before the wedding, we had our rehearsal dinner at a restaurant near the venue. The atmosphere was joyful and relaxed, with heartfelt toasts from our closest friends and James's family. For a few hours, I was able to push aside my anxiety and focus on the celebration ahead. As we were leaving the restaurant, I received a text from an unknown number. See you tomorrow, sis. Hope you saved me a good seat. My blood ran cold. I showed the message to James, who immediately contacted our security team to heighten their alertness for the next day. That night in our hotel room, James held me close. Whatever happens tomorrow, remember that we're starting our life together, surrounded by people who genuinely love us. That's what matters. I fell asleep with his words in my heart, trying to focus on the meaning of the day rather than the potential for disruption. I woke on my wedding day to sunlight streaming through the hotel curtains and a gentle knock at the door. Jessica entered with a tray of coffee and pastries, followed by my bridesmaids bearing mimosas and excited smiles. The nervous knot in my stomach began to loosen as I was swept up in the joy of preparation. Our venue was a beautifully restored historical building with exposed brick walls, soaring ceilings, and large windows that filled the space with natural light. The ceremony would take place in the main hall, followed by dinner and dancing in the adjacent garden room. When I arrived for final preparations, the space was already being transformed with arrangements of wildflowers and twinkling lights that would glow softly as evening fell. In the bridal suite, surrounded by my closest friends, I tried to stay present in each moment. Jessica arranged my hair while sharing funny stories from our college days. My coworker Mia helped me into my dress, a simple but elegant design with vintage-inspired lace detailing. James's sister Rachel presented me with a delicate sapphire bracelet as my something blue. The calm was shattered when Rachel's phone buzzed with a text from her husband, who was with the groomsmen. Security alert at the front entrance. She read, her face concerned. Your parents and brother are trying to get in. My heart raced as Rachel stepped out to get more information. When she returned, her expression was a mix of concern and reassurance. The security team has it handled, she said, squeezing my hand. But maybe you should see for yourself. She led me to a window overlooking the venue entrance. From my vantage point, I could see the confrontation unfolding. My parents, dressed formally as if they had been invited, were arguing with the security guards. My mother was gesturing emphatically, her face flushed with anger. My father stood beside her, attempting to appear dignified despite the scene they were causing. Kyle, slightly behind them, was clearly intoxicated, swaying slightly and pointing aggressively at the entrance. We're family! I could hear my mother's voice shrill with indignation. You can't keep us from our daughter's wedding. The security guard remained calm but firm. I'm sorry, ma'am, but your names are not on the guest list, and we have explicit instructions not to allow unauthorized entry. This is ridiculous, my father bellowed. I'm paying for half of this wedding. This was a blatant lie, as James and I had funded the entire event ourselves. As I watched frozen with a mixture of sadness and anger, a car pulled up and my grandmother Dorothy emerged assisted by a man in a suit whom I recognized as Mr. Caldwell, our family's longtime lawyer. Grandma Dorothy approached my parents with a straight back and determined expression despite her 80 years. "Margaret Richard, this is not the way," she said, her voice carrying clearly. "You're making spectacles of yourselves." My mother turned on her. "Mother, stay out of this. This is about family, and Trina has turned her back on hers." "No, Margaret," Grandma Dorothy replied firmly. "This is about the trust fund that Harold left for both his grandchildren." My parents' expressions changed instantly from righteous anger to something closer to fear. Kyle, still unsteady, looked confused. "What trust fund?" he slurred. "What's she talking about?" Mr. Caldwell stepped forward, opening his briefcase and removing a folder. "Mr. and Mrs. Campbell, I have documentation showing systematic withdrawal from the grandchildren's trust over the past 15 years. Funds that were designated equally for both Trina and Kyle have been almost exclusively directed toward Kyle, with Trina receiving less than 5% of her entitled share." My father's face had gone pale. "Those withdrawals were approved for educational and housing expenses." "Yes," Mr. Caldwell nodded, "but not exclusively for one beneficiary. This constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty and misappropriation of trust funds. Dorothy has been collecting evidence for years and recently brought it to my attention. As trustee, she has the authority to demand repayment and potentially pursue legal action." My mother turned to Kyle, who was now fully focused on the conversation, his expression darkening as understanding dawned. "You told me there was only my trust fund," he said accusingly. "You said Trina didn't get one because she chose to be independent." The family secret was unraveling before my eyes. My parents had not only favored Kyle emotionally throughout our lives, but had been systematically diverting financial resources meant for both of us solely to him. The unfairness I had felt intuitively for years had been even more concrete than I'd realized. "We did what we thought was best," my mother said desperately to Kyle. "You needed the support more than she did." Kyle's face twisted with a complex mixture of emotions: betrayal, confusion, and anger. "So you've been lying to both of us for years." He turned and walked unsteadily back toward the street, ignoring my mother's calls to come back. My father, attempting damage control, approached Mr. Caldwell. "We can discuss this privately, surely. This is hardly the time or place." "I agree," Mr. Caldwell replied coolly. "My office Monday morning, 9 a.m. In the meantime, I suggest you respect your daughter's wishes on her wedding day and leave the premises." Security began escorting my stunned parents toward the exit. Before leaving, my mother looked up toward the building, somehow finding the exact window where I stood watching. Our eyes met briefly, hers filled with a mixture of anger and something that might have been shame. Then she turned away, following my father to their car. Grandma Dorothy remained behind, speaking briefly with security before being escorted inside. Rachel squeezed my arm gently. "Are you okay?" I realized I was trembling, but not with fear or sadness. A strange sense of vindication and freedom washed over me. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with how true it felt. "I really am." Jessica appeared at my side, concern written across her face. "The ceremony is supposed to start in 20 minutes. Do you need some time?" I took a deep breath and smoothed down my dress. "No, this day isn't about them. It never was. Let's get married." When I walked down the aisle a short while later, it was with Grandma Dorothy proudly escorting me, her weathered hand steady on my arm. James waited at the altar, his face lighting up as our eyes met. Around us were the people who had shown us true love and support, friends who had become family, colleagues who had become friends, and the few blood relatives who had earned their place in our lives through genuine care rather than obligation. Our vows were deeply personal, with James promising to always see and value me for exactly who I am, and me pledging to build with him a home where love was never conditional. When the officiant pronounced us married, the cheer that went up from our guests felt like a collective affirmation of the family we had chosen and the boundaries we had established to protect our happiness. The celebration that followed was everything we had hoped for: joyful, intimate, and unmarred by drama. As James and I shared our first dance, I caught sight of Grandma Dorothy watching us with tears in her eyes and a proud smile on her face. In that moment, I knew that while the confrontation outside had been painful, it had also been necessary, the final cutting of a toxic cord that had constrained me for too long. Later in the evening, Grandma Dorothy pulled me aside for a quiet moment. "I should have done this years ago," she said, regret tinging her voice. "I saw what was happening, but I kept hoping your parents would correct course on their own." I hugged her tightly. "You did it when it mattered most. And you've always seen me, Grandma. That meant everything." As James and I departed that night amid a shower of flower petals and well wishes, I felt lighter than I had in years. The road ahead might still have complications, especially with the legal issues surrounding the trust fund, but we would face them together, surrounded by genuine love and support. The weeks following our wedding were a whirlwind of contradictions. The joy of our honeymoon in Portugal contrasted sharply with the legal proceedings that awaited us upon our return. Mr. Caldwell had moved quickly to secure the remaining trust assets and initiate the process of accounting for all the misappropriated funds. My parents faced serious consequences for their financial misconduct. The family court ordered them to repay the trust the full amount they had diverted exclusively to Kyle over the years, plus interest. This represented a substantial sum that would require them to sell several properties, including their vacation home. Beyond the financial penalties, the exposure of their actions had social repercussions. Friends and extended family who had always seen them as pillars of the community now viewed them with suspicion. Their real estate business suffered as clients questioned their integrity. What surprised me most during this period was Kyle's reaction. A week after the wedding, I received an email from him that was uncharacteristically reflective. "I had no idea about the trust," he wrote. "I always thought the help they gave me was normal parent stuff. I'm starting to see a lot of things differently now. I'm sorry for how I've treated you over the years. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I'm getting help." His words seemed sincere, though I approached them with caution. Years of entitlement and self-centered behavior wouldn't change overnight. Still, the revelation about our parents' manipulation had clearly shaken him, perhaps enough to prompt genuine reflection. I responded with a brief but not unkind message acknowledging his apology and wishing him well with his therapy. I wasn't ready for more than that, and to his credit, Kyle respected that boundary, not pushing for immediate reconciliation. James and I decided to use a portion of the recovered trust money to start a scholarship fund for students from dysfunctional families, particularly those who had been scapegoated or overlooked. The Trina Campbell Foundation would provide not just financial assistance, but mentorship and psychological support for young adults learning to navigate life with limited family backing. My own healing journey continued through therapy with Dr. Harper. We worked through the complex layers of my childhood experiences, processing the grief of never having the parents I deserved, while celebrating the strength I had developed as a result of those challenges. "The hardest part for many adult children of dysfunctional parents," Dr. Harper explained during one session, "is learning that it's okay to set boundaries. You're not being disloyal or ungrateful by protecting yourself from harmful behavior." Those words resonated deeply as I navigated my new relationship with my parents. After the legal proceedings concluded, they made several attempts to reestablish contact, sending cards and emails that ranged from apologetic to defensive. I responded selectively, maintaining firm boundaries about what kind of interaction I was willing to have. My relationship with Grandma Dorothy, on the other hand, flourished. She moved to a senior living community just outside Chicago, allowing us to visit regularly. Her apartment became a second home to James and me, a place where we gathered for Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. Kyle and I began a tentative reconnection after he had been in therapy for 6 months. We started with occasional phone calls and eventually progressed to meeting for coffee when he visited Chicago for a job interview. He had finally found direction, pursuing a degree in counseling with a focus on family systems. "I want to help other families avoid what happened to ours," he explained during one of our meetings. "All those years of being the golden child, I was actually being set up for failure. I never learned resilience or independence the way you did." While our relationship remained a work in progress, there was a new honesty between us that made genuine connection possible for the first time. My parents proved more resistant to change. They attended family therapy at Kyle's insistence, but struggled to take full responsibility for the damage their favoritism had caused. My mother, in particular, continued to justify their actions as doing what they thought was best, unable to fully acknowledge the harm they had inflicted. I established clear parameters for our limited interactions: no unsolicited advice, no criticism of my choices, and absolute respect for James and our relationship. When these boundaries were violated, as they occasionally were, I would end the call or visit immediately, a consistent consequence that slowly began to modify their behavior. James remained my steadfast supporter throughout this complex family renegotiation. His own healthy family relationships provided a model for what was possible, while his medical training gave him insight into the psychological aspects of family dysfunction. Healing doesn't always mean reconciliation, he reminded me during a particularly difficult period after a tense holiday gathering. Sometimes it just means finding peace with the reality of who people are and choosing your level of engagement accordingly. Our professional lives continued to thrive alongside our personal growth. James was promoted to head of pediatric surgery at his hospital, while I was made partner at my architectural firm. We bought and renovated a charming brownstone, creating a home that reflected our shared aesthetic and values. A year and a half after our wedding, we received unexpected but welcome news: we were expecting a child. As we prepared for parenthood, we had many conversations about the kind of family environment we wanted to create. "Our child will never wonder if they're loved," I said as we painted the nursery a warm yellow. "And if we have more children later, there will never be a golden child or a scapegoat in our home." James kissed my forehead. "We'll make mistakes, but they won't be the same ones your parents made. We'll love our children equally while recognizing their unique needs and personalities." The pregnancy prompted further reflection on my family relationships. While I had made peace with the limited role my parents would play in my life, I wanted our child to have as many loving influences as possible. This led to more intentional efforts to include Kyle in our lives as he continued to show positive changes. As my due date approached, we hosted a small gathering to celebrate the impending arrival. Grandma Dorothy was there, of course, along with our close friends and James's family. To my surprise, Kyle not only attended but arrived early to help set up, bringing a thoughtfully chosen gift and making genuine efforts to connect with James's family. My parents had been invited as well, but with clear expectations about their behavior. They attended somewhat subdued, but making visible efforts to engage appropriately with other guests. My mother even approached me privately at one point. "I know I haven't been the mother you deserved," she said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "I can't change the past, but I would like to be a good grandmother if you'll give me that chance." I didn't make promises I wasn't sure I could keep. "We'll take it one step at a time," I replied. "What matters most is that you respect our parenting decisions and treat this child differently than you treated me." She nodded, a flicker of sadness and understanding crossing her face. It was a small moment of acknowledgement, not enough to erase the past, but perhaps enough to create possibility for a different future. As we prepared for our child's birth, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The painful decision to stand up to my family by not inviting Kyle to my wedding had triggered a cascade of revelations and changes. While the process had been difficult and at times heartbreaking, it had ultimately led to greater truth and the possibility of healthier relationships. I realized that by refusing to participate in the family fiction any longer, I had not only freed myself, but had inadvertently offered Kyle a chance at freedom too, from the golden child role that had ultimately limited his growth. Even my parents, forced to confront the consequences of their actions, were being given an opportunity to evolve, though whether they would fully embrace it remained to be seen. The night before I went into labor, James and I sat on our porch swing watching the sunset. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked, his hand resting gently on my rounded belly. "About how everything unfolded with your family?" I considered the question carefully. "No," I finally answered. "I regret that it had to happen at all, but not how I handled it. Standing up for myself at our wedding was the first step toward building the kind of family our child deserves, one based on truth and equal love." The following evening, our daughter was born, her entrance into the world uncomplicated and joyful. As I held her in my arms, James beside us, I felt a profound sense of the cycle being broken. This child would grow up knowing she was seen and valued exactly as she was. She would understand that love isn't a competition and that her worth wasn't conditional on achievement or compliance. We named her Grace Dorothy, honoring the grandmother who had finally stood up for what was right even when it was difficult. And in that name was also a recognition of the grace that allows us to grow beyond our wounds, to create something beautiful, even from painful beginnings. What would you do if you were faced with toxic family dynamics like mine? Would you have the courage to stand your ground and give them an ultimatum? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that. It's okay to set boundaries with family. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes the family we choose is more important than the one we're born into.